Alright guys, GM Product Performance here. So today I want to discuss the differences between the hand grenade 400 transmission and the Ford C6. But before you guys, GM guys, tune out because I made that hand grenade comment on your 400, your precious 400, hang in with me because I promise you by the end of this video you'll be flexing in the mirror. And don't worry, Ford friends, I've got your back as usual. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the differences here, or we're going to discuss the differences here between the 400 and the C6. And, you know, what's the better transmission? That's the question. I'm in the Ford world, and a lot of guys over the last 20, 25 years have, said to me, man, I want to run this C6, but everybody says it won't hold up. I got to put a 400 in here, and it's going to cost me a lot of money to put a 400 on a Ford motor, and I'm kind of a Ford guy, and I don't really want to do that. So it's a great question. And is the 400 better than the C6? Well, short answer, in a lot of ways it is. I'm going to tell you that right off. I'm a Ford guy. I mean, I like everything, but I'm well known for being a Ford guy and partial to Fords, but I'm going to look at this objectively here and go over the differences and why people say the 400 is better. But it doesn't mean if you're a Ford guy and you want to run a C6, you can't. Because you most certainly can. And we're going to go over, I'm not going to go over so much today all the fixes for these problems, but I just want to go over the differences between the transmissions, and I want people to understand why they say that the 400 is better. It is in certain ways, but the C6 has its strengths too. But I will say this up front if you don't want to watch the whole video. If you're a Ford guy and you want to run a C6, in most cases, I'm going to tell you the C6 is going to work just fine and be reliable. And you don't have to go through this pain of trying to adapt a really expensive 400 in the vehicle. Now, there is a point where even myself will recommend going to a 400 over the C6. But we're talking stuff, 1,500 plus horsepower. And the only real reason I tell you to go to the 400 is because you have much better aftermarket support. I start to worry about things like using a stock case on the transmission and stuff like that. And when I say a 400, I'm talking an aftermarket deal. I'm talking aftermarket case, straight cut gears, something that's not even that much the GM product anymore, because that's got its shortcomings too when you get up into that power range. But if you're talking something mild, street car, maybe a little bit of track or whatever, if it's a Ford, just keep the Ford transmission. If it's a GM, just keep the GM transmission. You don't need to go down this road of converting and spending a lot of money for no reason. Alright, so why is the 400 better? Is the 400 better? Let's take a look. Here's the number one reason I would say the 400 has a better reputation. It's very easy to work with, and here's why. So here's a chart. It just kind of tells you what's on, what clutch pack is engaged in what gear. So, and of course there's variations with engine braking and things like that. I'll get into that a little bit. This could be an extremely long video if I go into depth on everything. I'm just going to try to do a quick overview here. I'm already 4 minutes in, almost 5 minutes in. I'm going to try to run through this in about 20 minutes. I don't want to go all day on this. If there's more interest in this, I'll do more. But So, okay, here's the difference between the C6 and the hand grenade 400. I'm sorry, the TH400. I'll stop saying hand grenade. I don't want you GM guys to click off the video and get mad at me. So, and I'll tell you why I call it the hand grenade 400 too, because it can turn into a hand grenade. But we're going to go over that in a minute. So, in first gear, this is just in drive position, so you're not using your engine braking features. So in first gear, the only thing that has to be on is the forward clutch. And then you have this low roller clutch that's on. The low roller clutch is a mechanical one-way clutch, so it allows rotation in one direction but not the other, if you're not sure what a roller clutch is. Okay, so in second gear, what happens? To create the shift in a second gear, the intermediate clutch comes on. And then what happens is you have this intermediate roller clutch, which is holding. It's not a hydraulic clutch, it's a mechanical clutch. It's just like your low roller clutch, but you have an intermediate roller clutch and a low roller clutch. C6 only has a low roller clutch. It doesn't have an intermediate roller clutch. And what happens here, and this is where the hand grenade comment comes in. So, and forgive me, this is from a 4R70W. It's not a 400, guys, so you GM guys that are jumping out of your skin right now. It's the same principle. I just don't have a 400 apart on the bench today. I don't do a lot of 400s anymore. So what happens is, same principle. You have this drum. On the 400, this would be your high gear drum. And this is your intermediate roller clutch. This is a diode. It clicks. But on the 400, it's not a ratcheting, diode type. It's a roller type. So what happens is the rollers will spread this race, and this race will sinter and come apart and throw chunks of metal, and it can go through the case of the transmission and come up through the floorboards of the car. It's very dangerous if under a lot of power, a lot of RPM, this scatters, this outer race will scatter and actually can come through the floorboards and take your feet out and family jewels and God only knows what. So you definitely have to be but you definitely have to be putting shields and stuff around this transmission. Now, what some guys do is they actually take this device here from a 4R70W and they retrofit this onto the 400. Now, this is not a bulletproof piece. It can still break as well, but typically what happens is it just strips out. It doesn't typically sinter into pieces and come through the floorboard and break the transmission case and all that. It'll just kind of strip out. So it's more safe design. A little bit stronger, yeah, but again, has its limits. But at least it, doesn't make it turn into a hand grenade anymore. So that is my biggest criticism of the 400. And I would say, honestly, that's primarily the only thing I don't like about it. It's a fixable problem, though. So if it's something with a lot of power, you can go to a device like this. This diode can be retrofitted in there. Or they also have what they call a spragless design, where they've eliminated this. They've just made this a solid so it's locked all the time. And hydraulically, now you're creating a timing issue, but again, it's a fixable problem, but it is another complication. Costs a fair amount of money to convert to that kind of setup, but again, it's something that's fixable, but it creates a timing issue more like a Ford has. So let's go over that timing issue. Well, I should have done that first, but got ahead of myself. So, okay. All right. Second gear, the intermediate clutch comes on, and then that intermediate roller clutch is holding, or at least hopefully still holding and hasn't scattered. And so now when you shift to third, here's the beauty of this transmission. When you shift to third, what happens is, because of this roller clutch, it will freewheel the other direction, because this drum is changing directions as it shifts. So it's rotating in first, and when you hit second gear, it locks up, and then when you shift into third gear, now it rotates again. Okay? And that intermediate clutch allows this to happen, and you don't have to release anything to shift into third. That's the beauty of it. So you have a progressive gear train design where you just have intermediate clutch coming on, and then the direct clutch comes on. So on a C6, you have a band that will grab and hold that drum. And the 400 has a band around the drum too, but that's only on for your engine braking feature. We'll go over that also, but the C6 has a band that's on all the time. So when you shift to third, you've got to release that band just in time to have the direct clutch come on, and to not have a tie-up or have what's called the 2-3 flare, which is what everybody complains about with a C6. So what happens is, when you go to make the 2-3 shift, the RPMs can potentially momentarily buzz up, and then they'll get pulled back down when the high gear comes in. So that's a big complaint with that transmission, and that a lot of that's in the valve body design, and that's something I've worked to correct here, and I don't really hear complaints about that 2-3 flare anymore. It's a fixable deal. So, but as far as valve body design is concerned with your 400, it makes it very simple. You just have something come on and then something else come on. I don't have to worry about timing. Very simple, very effective. Clutch life tends to be better. Because even with the C6, even if you get it to not flare, you have like a temporary bind up. Sometimes that can be very significant, where on the 2-3 shift, if it's wanting to bind up on you, it can be a really hard and jerky shift. Might feel like you got rear-ended down the track or something. So you have to be careful for excessive overlap as well with that unit. Again, it's something that's pretty correctable, but it takes some doing. The valve body design's more complicated. 400 valve body design's a piece of cake on, when you're making trans brakes and manual valve bodies and things like that, because you don't have to worry about that. Now, you do have to worry about it if engine braking is involved. If you're using the band on that high gear drum, or you're using the band on your low drum, things like that. So things can get complicated. So, all right, I hope that makes a little bit of sense. So let's see, I got a little cheat sheet here. We've kind of gone over that. So, we've gone over that. The low roller clutch in the back of the case, for first gear, I would say the GM low roller is a stronger piece than the Ford. It's typically not an issue in the Ford, but it is a stronger piece. It's a larger diameter, more rollers, and I would, have to say that's a bit of an advantage, but not a huge advantage. I mean, again, with valve body design, this is correctable. There's a clutch pack in there that will hold in conjunction with that low roller case. I'm sorry, yeah, the low roller clutch. Say that 10 times fast. That is something that is correctable, but again, more intricacies in the valve body can create a timing issue. I like engine braking in first. I like the band or clutch coming on in first, even on the 400. So I think that's something that even the 400 should be using, but they can get away without it more than a Ford guy can, or a C6 guy, let's say. So a little bit of an advantage, not much. Another thing that's kind of cool about a 400, the factory actually made straight cut gears for it. I believe they would put them in RVs. That's pretty slick. I don't know how easy those are to get anymore. And of course you have people in the aftermarket making straight cut gears and things. I don't really see that for a C6. It would be nice if straight cut gears were made for a C6. I do believe a company has them, but not a fan of that company. They stole from us, so I'm not going to recommend it. They're probably junk anyways, honestly. A lot of stuff that company makes is junk. But anyways, that factory straight cut gears, that's pretty cool. I like that. I will say this, and this is going to make the GM guys mad. The metallurgy in the factory pieces, the hubs and drums and things like that, the investment castings, I find the Ford stuff to be better quality. I'm sorry, it just is. Hubs and things that may tend to break or strip out on GM trans typically don't on a Ford. Just, a little bit better metallurgy there. But again, with tremendous aftermarket support on a GM trans, not really an issue. You can just buy billet pieces and things. So, again, because the gear train, the way it's designed is more simple, the hydraulics are more simple. And Ford, I love Fords to death, but my God, did they overcomplicate things sometimes. Their hydraulic designs are just more complex and, can be a little bit more finicky and things like that. GM's a little bit more simple and streamlined. I want to show you this too. Here's another thing I like about the GM. So here's your C6 valve body. It's aluminum, and it's got a lot of valves, and there's probably 2 or 3 of those valves that I think, why are we doing this? But they do. Here's the 400 valve body. It's cast iron, large valves. It tends to not stick like a Ford does. The aluminum, little particles get into the aluminum and things and can get embedded in the aluminum bores and things, and the valves tend to stick more and be more finicky. These things here, this cast iron valve body it's pretty nice, man. I have to admit, large valves, and just, I'm not saying valves can't stick in it. Sure, they can, but they're less prone to. Less valves in it. It's a nice piece. So I'm gonna give credit to the 400 on that one. So that's another thing there. Alright, let's see. So we went into that. Yep, we don't have the shift timing issues. Here's another thing I want to talk about. The governor. Ford does not make it easy to get to the governor. You've got to remove your drive shaft. You've got to remove the extension housing. And then there's 4 bolts that hold the governor on. So if you want to play games with changing shift points and stuff like that with the governor, on a Ford, it's a nightmare. I typically tell people don't bother. GM, it's got a little clip and a cover on the side of it. You push the clip over, it looks like a clip on a master cylinder. Just pull the clip back, pop the cover off, governor slides out. You play your game with the governor, slide it right back in, cover on, clip, done. It's beautiful. You don't even lose much oil when you do it. A Ford, oh my God. So, chalk another one up to GM on that one. The C6, not much aftermarket support. Like I said, no good quality straight cut gears for it. You can't get an aftermarket SFI rated case. There is some aftermarket support for the C6. I mean, we try to support it, but I don't make gears. I don't make a case for it. Just simply not enough people using them to justify the cost. So unfortunately, that's why I kind of cap them off around, it's a gray area, but roughly 1,200 horsepower I kind of cap off that C6. It's just because of lack of, case, it's safety reason. That case could break, or, you really need straight cut gears at some point because you just start tearing up the pinions and things. But you can get all that for a 400. Alright, so here's something that I like about the C6 over the 400. The pressure regulator valve is in the valve body on a C6. Here it is right here. So it's pretty easy to remove the valve body and make a pressure change if you need to. It's in the pump on a 400, so you got to pull the trans, pull the pump if you want to play games with pressure for the most part. Maybe some ways around that, but that's pretty much what you're looking at. Major pain in the ass. Here's that pressure regulator valve in the 400 right here. It's in the pump. It's a pain. The stator tube on the pump, which supports your one-way clutch inside your torque converter. It's a smaller diameter tube than a C6, so anything with a really high stall converter and a really hard launch at a high RPM, you're more likely to break the stator tube on a 400, I believe, than on a C6. C6 has a larger diameter tube. But again, aftermarket support, not really an issue. You can buy things. You can buy a new tube for it and things that, prevent that problem. It's more money, but I'll tell you this, you can build a C6 cheaper, say in whatever, let's just say around the 800,000 horsepower level, you can build a C6 cheaper than a 400. It just doesn't need as much. So that's a nice thing. One thing I will say about the GM transmissions that I don't really care for, the bell housings, the bottom of the bell is just all cut away and open. So you tend to have a little bit more issue with bell housings cracking and things like that. Where the Ford, it's enclosed all the way around. So even though they're kind of thin, you get more support on the Ford bells. So the Ford bell is stronger. Like on a Power Glide, it's real common, you know, you cut the bell off and put an aftermarket, you know, even your 400 too. I mean, sometimes you do that just to adapt it to a different engine, but a lot of times it's done just because that bell becomes a weak point. So, a little bit of an advantage on a Ford. Other thing I like about the 400 over the C6 would be the engine braking in second gear. You can turn that on and off by controlling that band. The C6, you cannot control engine braking in second. You just have to have it, which is fine. I really like it on anyways, so, you know, just kind of depending on how you look at that. I mean, I like to have options, so I would say I like the 400 for that, but honestly, engine braking in second, I'd rather just have it on all the time anyways. So, at least with the Ford, you don't really have to worry about it. It's already inherent in the gear train design, so I don't know. Call that a plus, call it a minus, I'm not sure. But in any case, that's a difference there. In first gear, they both can be controlled by, in the 400 it's a band, in the C6 it's a clutch pack, a really heavy duty clutch pack for the engine braking in first. And again, that's controllable. You can turn it on, not turn it on. So that's nice there. They both do that. So another thing, let me go grab one so you can see it. Hang on a second. So this guy here, this is out of the C6, out of the forward drum. It's a disc spring. They also call it a Bellevue spring. And what it is, it's a lever. So you push on it here. It pushes the clutch pack here. It's supported out here. So it multiplies the force of the piston apply. And the reason they do this in here, now GM doesn't have this. So what happens to a C6 is when you pump up your line pressure for a performance application, this disc spring starts to apply so much pressure, it'll actually break the drum. Might just break the top of the top pressure plate, but it can actually break the whole top of the drum off if you start really playing games with pressure. And the reason it's in this unit, so what Ford does, here's kind of what they do. And when I say they, I mean the factory. So on your 2-3 shift, so that's not super hard, you know, because you got to remember, when they design these transmissions and they put them in daily driver cars for the mass public, the goal is to make them shift smooth, not make them shift super hard like we might like for a race car or something. So what they do is they cut back shifting in the third gear. Now, Ford cuts back the pressure. They'll cut down the overall line pressure. So to compensate for that, so what happens is when you cut back that line pressure, you could potentially burn up that forward drum. But with this disc spring in there, that's applying a tremendous amount of force because the force is multiplied, you still have enough force to hold that forward drum from slipping when you cut back the pressure. So the nice thing about this is it needs very little line pressure to create a lot of pressure to hold that clutch pack, which is all well and good, but when we get to a point where we need more pressure for high gear drum or second gear band, now we're overstressing this system. And that can create problems, like I said, of breaking the drum. GM has a different approach. They don't cut the pressure back, which also simplifies things hydraulically as well. So instead of cutting the main line pressure back, what they do is they have a dual piston design inside the high gear drum. And give me 1 second. I can probably find that in the circuit here. Let me actually show you that. Hold on. Okay. So if you look, it's kind of hard to see here. So this oil here, this is when we're in third gear. It's hard to see, but it looks like it fills the center portion of this piston, which is smaller area for third gear operation. But then when you go to reverse, so this oil comes in. They've cut off this other branch in this circuit. I wish they showed them both, but this will fill the large area of the piston to apply more force on it in reverse. So instead of using pressure boost and pressure cutback and things, they just control the amount of surface area that the reverse high clutch or direct clutch, if you want to call it, they just change, where they apply the piston. It has different surface area, if that makes sense. So, and that's something a lot of like your shift kits and things do. What they'll do in a performance application is they'll fill both those passages, and they don't care if that 2-3 shift becomes a lot more firm as a result of it, because it's a performance application and it's kind of assumed that you'll have a higher stall converter and that sort of thing. Alright, so the other thing I like is they use an accumulator. Now, let's see. Yeah, there's the accumulator. They use that large accumulator. There it is, right there in green. I like accumulators. They're much more responsive to throttle. Like you can have the shift really smooth at low throttle, pot throttle, but the accumulators will change, and when you get into heavy throttle and higher pressure, the accumulator will become more rigid and create a more firm shift. It just gives you more contrast in the shifts. Again, it's not really a big advantage if it's a race car. You're just bypassing accumulators typically anyways, but in my opinion, because of this intermediate clutch design, you don't really want to eliminate that intermediate accumulation, because you don't want to make that shift super hard and whipping up on that one-way clutch, or even if it's a diode in there, whatever you did to make it better, or add extra elements. They have like a 34 element or something, but making that shift super hard just increases the chances of scattering that race on that clutch. So, I want to leave that in there. That's an important piece in this unit, in the 400. C6, we don't really got to worry about that. And the way that servo design is, it kind of creates its own accumulation there. And it has another accumulator in the valve body, but we're not going to get into all that today. Again, I could spend hours picking apart every piece and every difference. I just wanted to give you a quick overview here of it. So that's the main differences in these units. So again, just to recap, if you're running a Ford, just stay with the C6. It's going to work. I promise you. There's things you have to do to it to make it work. don't let, if you call another builder, you don't call Broader Performance, you call somebody that's more familiar with GMs than they are with Fords. They're going to just tell you, oh yeah, you got to get rid of that C6, man. We got a bell, and we'll do you a 400 for it. You won't have to worry about it. Well, that's all well and good until you get the price tag on that. It's a lot of money, And, first of all, don't kid yourself. If we're talking stock trim, I don't think the 400 is any better in stock trim. Not really a big advantage there. But now if you're talking aftermarket support, yeah, 400's got more potential. If you've got thousands of dollars to pour into it, but C6 doesn't need as much as a 400 does, but ultimately the 400 has more potential because of the aftermarket support. I will say that. And, again, as I told you, there's a lot of little things that I like better about the 400 than the C6. And I'm a huge C6 fan. I really am. I've built a ton of them, and I get next to no problems out of them. And they work just fine when you know what to do to them. But, and I'm not even talking about pouring a lot of money into them. C6 doesn't need a lot of money, man. And they do pretty damn good. But 400, again, it's got some nice features. But if you're a Ford guy, don't feel like you got to convert to a 400. Maybe over 1,200 horsepower. You get up into the 1,500, 2,000 range. I'm probably going to tell you to do that just for safety reasons. I know I've got customers in the 1,500 range, and it works. But I don't recommend it because I don't like transmissions with stock cases at that power level. I don't care what the transmission is. Stock case, I get worried. That's why I like the 400 and the Power Glide, because you can just get an aftermarket case for them. It's really the only reason. I'm not a big Power Glide fan. I'll be honest with you. They've done a lot with it. They remake everything for it, but it's not a great transmission in stock trim. But I'm not going to get it. I'm not here to talk about the Power Glide and my opinions on that. But so GM guys, yeah, I'm with you. There's a lot of things better about your 400 than about the C6. But if you understand the Ford product, it's a great unit. So Ford guys, don't get discouraged. There is no real reason to run out and spend, whatever, $6,000, $7,000, I don't even know anymore, to put a 400 behind your Ford motor. Don't bother. Do a C6, man. It's all right. You'll be fine. You'll surprise a lot of people. So, okay, guys. I hope this kind of helps you. I know it wasn't the greatest demonstration on the planet, but it would take me a lot of time to do something really intricate. If you want to, if there's anything on this that you want more explanation on, please put it in the comments. And I'd like to hear your thoughts too on what you guys think. What do you guys think? If you're GM guy out there watching, I hope we got GM guys watching still. Please put in the comments. Tell me some things about the 400 over the C6 that you like. Without being a 5-year-old and the GM's just better because it just is. It's GM. We're here to discuss real reasons as to why it's better and why it isn't, and all that sort of thing. I remember these arguments in high school. The small block Chevy's way better than the small block Ford. Why? Oh, it's just a better motor. Why is it a better motor? Well, it makes more power. Well, what do you mean? More torque, more horsepower, mid-range, top end, bottom end, all of it. Why? Well, they never really had a reason. It's just, you got to have a reason. You tell me why. Tell me why something's better, you know? Why would the C6 be better than a 400? You know, let's hear it. You know, let's hear your thoughts. And if you think I'm wrong that, you know, the C6 is better in every aspect, great. You know, let's hear it. So don't be afraid to throw some comments in on this one. I'd like to get a discussion going on this. And, you know, maybe I'm wrong about some things, but just my opinion. You know, I've built a lot of 400s, and I started out as a GM guy, as far as, I was never really you know, I was more of a Ford guy as far as personal taste, but I started out building GM transmissions. I don't have anything against them. I think they've got some good stuff, but 700, 4L60, yeah, I'm not a fan of those, but anything else, yeah, you know, but anyways. All right, guys, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.